Hi, Misha here. What you doing? Not really up to much here. Had a lot going on, a couple of birthdays in the family that took up some weekends, some bad weather. Still waiting on construction to be done at the cabin and starting on the range part. So while we have a lot of videos planned, including a lot of shooting videos, right now, just kind of in that waiting period. So just wanted to do something to hang out with you guys, and very informal, unscripted video. Maybe a little story time here, because you know something I hear a lot, it gets said in most all of our live streams, you know, Jay used to say it, I've heard it from J-Ro, Fox says it a lot. They say, I'm not a bullpup person, I'm not a bullpup guy. And a lot of people that even are actually rather fond of bullpups say, well, I'm not a bullpup person, but I like the AUG, or I like the Tavor, I know, I'm just being funny. Whatever, like they're almost shameful about it. Like, well, you know, I'm not like those other bullpup people. I'm not like those other bullpup men. But yeah, and I wanted to say, let's stand up and be proud, because you know what? Even though I recognize bullpups usually have mediocre to crap triggers, even though I recognize the ergonomics are odd to poor, even though I recognize that they're definitely not as inexpensive as an AR-15 and other issues, you know what the truth is when it comes to taking guns to the range? I find that I grab my bullpups more often than I do a lot of other guns. Moreover, I just find that they're interesting. They're fun to pick up and study. And of course, they have been used by militaries for decades. This one here for coming up on 50 years. Why is that? If there's nothing to them, why have so many militaries, if not a majority, at least a significant minority, tried out bullpups? Some more successful than others. So let's just chat about it. And I'm going to give you my thoughts and experiences, trying to be sincere and honest. And I'd like to hear yours in the comments below. So let's be interactive with story times here. And with that, if you could, please do like, share, and subscribe. And if you'd like to help us out, check out the Patreon. As I mentioned, we're going to be building a range at the cabin land, and there will be some Patreon participation in that we should be announcing at the end of this month. So with that, why a bullpup? Why not an AR-15? When it comes to the bullpup design, at least in America, you begin and sometimes even end with Austria's very famous Steyr AUG, or AUG, essentially Universal Army Rifle. This was really one of the first to see full-scale military adoption, officially adopted as the STG-77, and you guessed it, 1977. One could argue the French FAMAS was at the exact same time, but it seems like it was a few months behind. Either way, neck and neck. But of course, the bullpup concept, which means the trigger group system, at least the trigger itself, and the controls like the safety, are in front of the magazine and its system, which are integrated into the shoulder stock itself. That's a bullpup. And this design, this layout, had been tested for decades before. In fact, quite famously, the British very briefly adopted the Enfield M2 bullpup before the decision was reversed and they went with the L1A1 SLR and FAL. Austria too had been using an FAL variant, the STG-58. Great rifle, but they wanted to modernize, and they wanted something in the newfangled 223, later to be 5.56 NATO cartridge. And at the time, in the 70s, really work started around 1968 with the earliest prototypes by 1974. Official adoption in 77, and the earliest ones in military service by 79-80. around that era, this was Colt's standard M16 offering, the M16A1. Because, yeah, the A2 wasn't out yet. And right here is one of the advantages. Both of these have a 20-inch barrel, but the Steyr AUG manages to be considerably shorter. The AUG is also a gas piston system versus direct. Both have shoulder stocks. Of course, the M16 AR-15 could not have a folding stock in this era because of its design. The AUG did not use AR mags, but to be fair, in 1977, AR mags were not a standard. In fact, 20-round mags are still quite prevalent. Somewhat forward-thinking for the era was the integration of a 1.5 magnified optic as a standard feature versus optional. Also, the quick change barrel system here and folding foregrip. QD barrel here, of course, which essentially can be done with one hand. And that was part of the Universal Army rifle concept that Steyr had. 20-inch barrel was the infantry rifle, but a 16-inch carbine, a 13-inch subgun, and even a 17-inch 9mm, and of course a 24-inch H-bar were all part of the package because the idea was, well, you could swap barrels using the same chassis. That was a pretty cool concept. And the M16 had that, but for that, Colt's idea originally was swapping the entire upper. And this was just the barrel assembly. Of course, it was also designed to take advantage of newer construction materials. The AR was very advanced for its day and time. You had, of course, aluminum receivers. You had Bakelite type furniture. Well, Steyr's AUG used polymer furniture for the most part, and with an extruded alloy receiver with integrated optic. So it was really going with the newest technology of the day and time. So that was the advantages. Length, all that stuff. But of course, disadvantages abound. One that's often pointed out, and rightfully so, is this trigger. You have to connect a bar going all the way back to the actual fire control group here, because your bolt ejects here, feeding from here. So there's this link. Now, this is a straight pullback trigger. In the military gun, it could be a stage trigger for semi or full. You could also have a lockout, cross bolt safety, so on and so forth. So, but in a semi-auto, yeah, it's not the best. To be fair though, with an AR-15, if you have a commercial one with a match trigger, they're quite nice. But if you have one with a true military trigger, well, it's still better than what you have in an AUG. They weren't matched light triggers, because in a military, you don't want a trigger so light that a soldier might accidentally set it off. Just pointing that out. Now, one area that is definitely better on the AR is the mag catch. Here versus way back here. Training can alleviate that, but yeah. Safety, toggle safety versus cross bolt. I'm perfectly fine with either, but I can understand how some may not be. So, advantages and disadvantages, but a lot of it comes down to training. And let's be honest with ourselves. Some of the folks out there prefer AR-15 controls, not because they are superior, but because they are familiar. Just because something is familiar doesn't mean it's superior. Not saying it is or isn't, but I hope that makes sense. Again, can you tell this is unscripted? Just not talking. So that's the AR versus this. And the reason I started off here was this was the first Bullpup really available in the USA. In any numbers whatsoever back in the 80s running through the 90s. Yes, there were a handful of French FAMASs. But the reason the AUG sold better than the FAMAS, they were both roughly the same money. But the AUG gave you a magnified optic, even if it's light magnification, and usually came with several spare magazines. Whereas the FAMAS, typically at that time did not have any type of optic on it, and you only got two 20-round mags. And they were being distributed by Century Arms versus Steyr. The AUG also just had more recognizability in media at the time, which I think is why it's one of the few Bullpups that even people that say they're not Bullpup people will accept or even appreciate. It has so much classic history, as it should. One can argue this is the most successful Bullpup in the world, has been and will be. This is of course just the AUG SA, the semi-auto, but it's based on the AUG A1. So, that's kind of the beginning. What about me? Well, of course, I grew up, the AUG was kind of an icon, but they were always really expensive, even in the late 80s, and then of course after the assault weapons ban in 94, they climbed and climbed. I did try out one of the MSAR STG 556s, and while at first they looked good, as you ran them, a lot of times they had issues. And the pre-ban AUGs were going up and up and up in money, but for various market reasons, there was a dip several years back. Recession, what have you, and that's when I was able to pick up my pre-ban here. And I really like it. I mean, it's an iconic gun, and it's just such a piece of history. I love the old square charging handle with the forward assist on it. Why did Austria go to this versus, say, an AR or something else? Again, when this was adopted, the AR was not as ubiquitous, not even close to what it is today. And I think they were just trying to push technology forward, and the universal rifle concept appealed to the Austrian military, but I think it also seemed like a very marketable thing to Steyr themselves. And I would say it was a success, at least for the most part. Of course, you had Australia, who adopted it, making the F-88 and eventually F-90. I still lament we did not get the A-Trax from Lithgow. I would have bought one in a heartbeat. Not because I think it's superior, but I think it's interesting. And I do like that. I like guns that are just interesting and different. We'll talk more about that in the video. I also still like retro AR-15s, but how boring would it be if my entire collection were AR-15s or AKs or FALs or G3s or anything else? Variety is the spice of life, which is why I never really thought about stopping at just one Bullpup. With the FS2000, this is one I've gone back and forth on myself many times. With the AUG, you can say there's historical significance and modularity. This, less so. However, this is FN trying to innovate in the 1990s. First put on the market as a select fire for military customers in 2001, and first appearing on the US civilian market in 2006. Not exactly a failure. They made roughly 80,000 select fires and a few more thousands in semi-auto. Let's say 90, 100,000 total production. And it was kind of pulled from their website finally in 2019, although it seems like actual production had ended several years prior. Love it, hate it gun. I'm kind of back in the loving it phase. Why is that? I mean, part of it is I've maybe been hit in the head one too many times. I'd fully admit that. Because it is a strange gun, the Tactical Tuna. Truly is. But it does represent kind of that next generation of Bullpups. We did have the Bushmaster M17. I've owned a couple of those over the years. And there were some foreign guns that never came over as semi-autos. But really, it was slim pickings in the 90s and early 2000s here. Mostly thanks to the 94 to 2004 assault weapons ban. But also just because of changing market needs. But to kind of compare the length situation, I brought out a Colt, and it too has a 16-inch barrel. This has a 16-inch barrel plus the muzzle device. You can see the Colt sticks out considerably longer. Of course, you can collapse the stock in. If we do that, we're roughly at the same length, although the Colt is still a smidgen longer. This is about 29 inches with the muzzle device installed. But of course, you don't have to retract a stock. And this was meant to be an infantry rifle. This is a modular forearm for military users. They had an underbarrel 40mm single-shot grenade launcher. They also did make a tri-rail that bolted right on very easily. And of course, much like with the AUG, they had a 1.6 power optic on this version. But from the get-go, they also had a Picatinny rail version. One thing they were going for here, and actually it kind of explains why Saudi Arabia was one of their bigger customers, this system is totally sealed up. Your ejection port is covered up. In fact, it stores up to 5 spent rounds in this tube. Your system here is covered except for your toilet bowl. Even magazines are not drop free. But unlike the Steyr AUG, it takes standard GI mags. Now, it doesn't take modern Magpul mags. How could it? When this was designed, these were the standard. Polymer mags were quite the rare thing and not used by militaries. I will say, though, this does have quite an abysmal trigger. Although, if I'm being honest, not as bad as I remember. I do like the safety selector system here, this kind of rocker type. It's unique and quite ambidextrous. And ARs at this era, turn to the 21st century, rails were only starting to come into vogue. Ambi safeties really weren't a thing yet. You really can't compare the FS2000 or the original F2000 to today's ARs, M16, M4s. You really need to compare it to what was out 20 years ago. I'm not going to sit here and defend the F2000. It wasn't exactly a failure, but it wasn't a success. But it was maybe a necessary step. FN was trying something new post-Cold War at a time when rifle innovation was at an interesting period. And this gas system, gas piston, two-way regulator would be carried over to the SCAR, and a few other elements. But I do think this gave Bullpups an odd reputation in America. The first one I bought was a tactical, because that's all that was out in 2006. And then I sold it to a friend after I got married. Picked up my first standard model from CD&N when they had a bunch of them on clearance around 2013, 2012, something like that. Sold it to Jay's father-in-law because he just really liked it, and I don't know, why not? And then picked this one up during all the COVID stuff again. Really not sure what I'd do with it. Maybe for some videos, but I kind of ended up liking it. And here it sits. And today these have cycled back around. 20 years ago when I was first starting to kind of study these, this was cutting edge technology. And it let me down. And it let a lot of us down. But now it's been so long, it's kind of becoming a retro type gun. You don't have rails everywhere. The whole self-sealed system. Yeah, we've talked about it quite recently on the channel, and it's kind of a gained a thing. I completely understand why someone wouldn't go for this. Realistically, I can't tell you that objectively it does anything that others don't. But it is unique and eye-catching. And it's one of those guns a lot of folks see and want to shoot if you've got one around. And while objectively there's no reason to pick it over anything else, subjectively, as I said, it gets boring just having only AR-15s or AKs in the collection. This is one of those, I just want something different guns. And it's also kind of a fun gun to master because the manual of arms is so different. Translation: if you can master the F2000, FS2000, you can master anything. And I was thinking about that the other day. A lot of people complain about pistols and rifles that, they're not familiar with it for training. And I understand that. So they try to make guns more like what they're familiar with. Typically, yes, an AR-15 or a Glock or a 1911 or a 92 FS, whatever it is. I understand that for practical purposes, but on the other hand, when you hand me a gun that's different, I see learning it and becoming proficient with it a challenge. Something new, to develop new muscle memory. Now this is just, purely for fun, purely for educational purposes, purely for range time. But when I can get familiar with the gun and learn how to operate it smoothly, I feel like I've accomplished something. It's kind of like learning how to drive different types of vehicles for you guys. Not so much for me. They don't let me learn how to drive vehicles. But yeah, I do enjoy getting familiar with the ins and outs and the oddities of guns. And if you're just into odd, bizarre guns, the FS2000 has got to be in the top 10 list. So it's crossed over into that. So while I didn't find it appealing when I was trying to get the newest, best thing 20 years ago, now I kind of wanted one for completely different reasons. I hope that makes sense. Unscripted, guys. Like, share, and subscribe. After the FS2K really failed to make a huge splash in America, partly due to cost and availability, partly because of its lackluster features, even if they were innovative, America wouldn't see many Bullpups for a bit, especially imports, but they would decide to give the design another go as hype built up for this guy, the IWI Tavor. Okay, Tavor, I know. Tavor. SAR, the semi-automatic version of the original TAR-21. And this had a lot of hype. And pre-orders were announced in 2012. I was one that did. But then that November and December, let's just say the gun market was set back for a while. Nevertheless, these did materialize in America in 2013 and in a few versions. And so this is kind of where the Bullpup story continues on here for us. And this is what it effectively replaced in the IWI IMI catalog. The Galil. We know it, we love it today. Essentially their take on a Kalashnikov. In the standard infantry version, the ARM had an 18-inch barrel, folding bipod, machined receiver, folding shoulder stock, iron sights. Some had a scope dovetail on the left side, others didn't. Overall length is a little under 39 inches with the stock deployed, and about 29 inches in a change with it folded. And this was not a light gun, about 9.5, sometimes verging on 10 pounds unloaded. But it was built for the rigors of the desert and started to see service right before the Yom Kippur War in 1973 and was in frontline service through about 1982. But because Uncle Sugar had given Israel so many M16s and they picked up Car-15s, it ended up being more of an export for IMI than actually used by the IDF long term. At least frontline for the ARM. Fun fact, the AR version, the one without the bipod and the standard handguard, that was for export and commercial sales here. The IDF really didn't use those. And in the 1990s, Israel had a hodgepodge of guns in frontline service. They had some old AKs knocking about still. They had a few different styles of Galil, and they had lots of M16A1s, updated M16s with a 1-in-7 twist, tons of Car-15s, some M4s. It was a mess. So in 95, work began in earnest on a new kind of universal rifle for the IDF post-Cold War. IMI would become IWI, and they would pick the Bullpup after some field testing for ergonomics and what was best for the infantry in 97. Basically, they went with a bullpup layout according to Israel because it could be available for different combat scenarios. It could be easily carried in a vehicle, be it a helicopter, a truck, an APC, a tank even. It could be used in the desert for the most part, but it could also be used in a more urban environment in the streets or even inside a building, which is more of the combat they were going for. And they could make it in several versions by just simply changing the barrel out. Not quite quick change like the AUG, but a lot easier than on the Galil or even M16. The militaries, select Fire TAR-21, first had prototypes in the very late 90s, and they had their first field test in 2000-2001. So around the same time the F-2000 was coming into production. And there would be extensive field testing, and in 2003 the IDF announced they would purchase this for the infantry, and the first true production versions were handed over to IDF units by 2006, and they were hoping to re-equip at least most of the front line and reserves by 2018. And there would be several versions adopted and put into production. The one here, the one I picked, is the long barrel. Well, relatively 18 inches, so the same barrel as our Galil. Yes, I did pick it because of the bayonet lug. Actually, speaking of lug, when we had this out for the German bayonet, it was kind of overlapping, and someone in the comments asked me, what about like an M7 bayonet? And since I aim to please, here we go. And yes, an M7 more or less fits flush. There is just the tiniest bit of overlap, really just where the flash hider is kind of rounded and crowned. Maybe it sticks out an nth of a millimeter on the ring of the bayonet, but it's basically straight up flush with the hider. Unlike several other bayonets we tried in that video. Again, my M9 here, where there's, just a little bit of a lip. Not a huge amount. It's secure. It's not going anywhere. But yeah, this ring is slightly forward on this M9 bayo from the muzzle. And we had that with a few other bayonets we tried in that video. Hey, while we were talking, I wanted to mention it. And actually, yes, having a bayonet lug was part of the reason I picked the 18-inch. But we'll get to the semi-autos in America in a minute. Compared to IMI's Galil, this is shorter, even with the same barrel length. And even if the stock were folded, it's about 28 inches overall. This was 29 with it stock folded, nearly 39 with it deployed. But weight was a big deal. This, like I said, was 9.5, sometimes nearly 10 pounds. This, depending on the version, was about 7.25 to 7.5 pounds, maybe a little more depending on the optic you went with, and that's the 18-inch version. So about a kilogram lighter and several inches shorter, and you don't have to mess with the folding stock, even if the Galil stock is pretty good. And they carried over a gas piston system because they really wanted something durable, dependable, especially in the sand, the dust, the desert. It's Israel, come on. That's why they took from 2003 to 2006 to further develop it before really getting production versions in. They even made this out of a special UV resistant polymer so that it wouldn't break down in harsh repeated sunlight, because plastics, and that is one area where this really does excel over the original AUG, is it is made out of newer technology than the original. Notice the cutlass style grip. This has a hinge trigger vis-a-vis the AUG straight pullback. This has the Meprolite M21 on it on a rail, and my tea cozy that these come with. Come on, who else? Sound out in the comments. Loves the fact that Meprolites come with these tea cozies. I love it. It's so something, and I love it. And the Tavor had folding front and rear sights with night inserts, unlike a lot of other guns. Side charging handle, which could be put on either way. We did have a modular forearm with pressure switch location, and we do have an AR style selector that can be moved to the other side, and ejection can be put on the other side too, although you do have to swap out bolt heads if you want to eject. We also do have that brass deflector if you fire offhand, and much like the F2000, this fed from standard AR mags, although for a time IWI tried making their own polymer mags to mixed results. And I will give credit, these were well suited to the riggers and were probably more reliable than a lot of other bullpuppies of the day and time. So the military versions really started to come into service 2006, 2008, and in 2008 the first civilian semi-automatic version appeared, but that was up in Canada. Because of their rules and laws, they had an 18.5-inch barrel. We would have to wait, like I said, until 2012 when the SAR here was announced, and they didn't start coming into the market until 2013, and for the first year they were pretty hard to get because there was a lot of hype. And there were three main versions. There was the 18-inch here with bayonet lug and pick rail. There was a 16-inch with no bayonet lug, not enough barrel, and pick rail. And then there was a 16-inch IDF version, which had a Mepro M21 optic and a special top. And the 16 inches were based off the Steyr, which had a 15-inch barrel in military service, but of course civilians needed a 16, and that was really meant for special forces. So you had an 18-inch meant for more infantry, and a version 3 inches shorter, so 25 inches overall, meant for special forces. And there would be other versions like the Steyr 21, which was a designated marksman, and there was even the MTAR micro Tavor with a 13-inch barrel that we'll get to. So after these hit the market, how did America respond to them, and were they right to do so? So demo SARs were all over the gun channels, T&E guns, reviews were rave, they were reliable, they were great, yada yada. But then eventually reality set in. If the AUG had a mediocre trigger, I'm going to be honest, the original SAR had a pretty trigger. Quite not good. Mushy and long. And I have tried a few of the different trigger packs, lighter, and they do lighten the pull, but they also decrease reliability. And what's funny is, in the IDF, they actually intended these to use both M855 and M193, with the infantry getting 193 most of the time. And I just point that out because they do have a 1 in 7 twist. But they actually work well with 55 grain. So yeah, the reality kind of set in of Bullpup. And after all the hype and things, interest did die down. I think people had unrealistic expectations, and they had really maybe never shot a Bullpup this generation, or had been a long time since they had. Personally, I thought it was well built, but maybe not quite as well built as a Steyr AUG. The ergonomics I like just fine, the safety's fine, the trigger I already talked about. I actually like the trigger style mag release, and I actually don't mind the positioning of the bolt release here. Unlike the FS2000, at least it did have drop 3 mags. I can't show you because we're on YouTube, but you know what they are. I wasn't disappointed, but I kind of debated, should I keep the IDF with the 16-inch barrel or this version? And I went with this because I like the bayonet lug. You can put a Mepro on it. If they had done the IDF style but in an 18-inch barrel, that's the one I would have gone with. But as it is, nice little combo. Mepro light's a interesting optic. It's kind of one of those love it or hate it optics. J-Ro particularly seems to like it. it is what it is. Unfortunately, the TAR 21 didn't quite go into service the way they planned, much like the Galil ARM before it did not. And the SAR was canceled a few years ago too, so these are no longer available as such, which has made some reevaluate them. It's fun, it's an interesting piece of history, IDF. One thing I do like is they were built to military standards, and if nothing else, are dependable and durable. That's for sure. Before we move on, I just had to show you this. This came in a little weapons pack for a figure. I have a separate channel, Misha, where I talk about models, figures, whatever I want. And I was getting a weapons pack for a 7-inch scale figure, and this came in it. And it's a small little Tavor TAR 21. Even has a little Mepro optic on it, charging handle, mag sticking out. It does have a longer barrel compared to what you'd normally see, but then again, this wasn't really meant to be 100% authentic because it was for a figure. But I just had to show you that real quick because I think it's funny. You can even tell it has the IDF style circle mount for QD magnifier on the back. But yeah, check out my secondary channel, Misha, if you're interested in this kind of fun stuff. Alright, next we kind of come to my first repeat, well, sort of, my Steyr AUG A3. This is an A3 M1 SA that I've had for quite a long time. And just to compare it with, here's an HK SP5 9mm, because this one's currently in the 9mm kit version. And I've always said, I gotta hand it to Steyr. You know, they got slapped down in '89. The AUG was banned by name with that import ban. They responded with the USR, Universal Sporting Rifle, which was knocked down in 97, 98 when Clinton added to Bush's original executive order. The Steyr USR was banned from importation by name again, and they even had trouble getting in spare mags. They went through a lot to get these in market, and then they partnered with Saber Defense to bring some guns in with some parts made by Saber, and then Saber went out of business, and it was just such a mess by 2012, but they didn't give up. Next, Steyr had Votor start making the receivers here in America, and they had FN help with the barrels. They'd bring over blanks. Now this is a true Austrian made barrel. They only allowed a few 9mm barrels in before they changed their mind on those two, but for the 223 barrels they brought over mandrels, and FN helped them finish them out, and then the rest of the parts were Austrian, and assembly was done by Steyr Arms in the US. So I had to respect their tenacity to bring their current version over. Now, the AUG A1 was replaced by the AUG A2 around 97, and the A2 had some quality of life improvements, but really the big deal was the optic was removable, which really should have been for all along. The AUG A3 appeared in 2004, and it had a few more quality of life improvements, but namely it had a side pick rail and a top rail, so you could put whatever optic you wanted. Now I put the armored pickle on, which was the European optic used for a while. It is as heavy duty as you can get. And as for the 9mm kit, the original AUG Para, as it was called, appeared around 1988, and it has gone through several updates and iterations too. But the idea to make this into a submachine gun, select fire, or a PCC, semi-auto only, have been around almost since the beginning. And you can see here, compared with the HK, which has a barrel under 9 inches, although it does have a flash hider on it, this has a barrel at roughly 17 inches. Yeah, for almost the same exact length with the stock, or in this case brace, deployed, you get a much longer barrel. Of course, this is done for legal purposes, and it's easy to swap back and forth between calibers thanks to the whole universal rifle system that Steyr made back in the 70s. In addition to rails, the A3 had an updated charging handle that folded in so it wouldn't poke you in the back if you had to sling it. Also operates as a silent closure device, as they call it, forward assist. And we had an external bolt release latch. The A1 always had a last round hold open, but no external latch. The A3 had them. And black became a more popular color. And of course there was a NATO version too. This is still the original, but yeah. It's a classic, and I just thought it was cool, still do today, that Steyr marked AUGs are available. After a couple of unsuccessful attempts to clone it here in America, I already mentioned the MSAR, it was good to have the real one back. And these have been and are every bit as good as the pre-ban, and in some ways better. I remember getting this particular gun the day after we got our cat Oscar, so that would have been August of 2013. And it's a 9mm here. That's kind of why I got it. As pre-bans became more and more valuable, I wanted a shooter AUG, and since there are a lot of differences, updates, this is the one I put the 9mm kit in, or I go back to 223 and I put the 24-inch H-bar or the 16-inch in. It's one of the few guns I have spare barrels for, and I also have no regrets for. Considering what pre-bans are going for, sub 2,000, usually in the 1800, 1700 range. I don't know what they're going for right now, but back then they were. For the A3, seemed like a good deal. And the quality's there, the interchangeability. The trigger is still an AUG trigger, but I'm going to be honest, I don't notice it. They're so much fun to shoot. New guns are reliable. They've done both 1 in 9 twist and 1 in 7 twist barrels in the past, and they've done some interesting conversions. Parts are kind of available just because the AUG is so popular. I mean, they're not as available as an AR-15 or even an MP5 type, but when it comes to Bullpups, this is pretty well about as standardized as it gets. I will say it doesn't have folding optics, iron sights like the Tavor. The 9mm version is a little heavier just because of the bolt mass, you know, being a direct recoil versus a lock breech, but that's neither here nor there. You can drop on a NATO stock, but yeah, a lot of them do take this Steyr mags even today, so that might be a detriment to people. But I would say, after all the hype of the Tavor, I'm going to kind of claim the market for a minute. The AUG A3 and now the M1 version have really been the best consistent bullpup seller in America. And mine's been through a lot. I've had a lot of fun with it. A lot of people try it out. You can do a lot with these. They're pretty customizable and a lot of fun. Again, the AUG will turn officially 50 years old in just a couple of years, and even the A3 version is actually 20 years old this year, but it's still going strong. But in a few ways it does show its age. It's not as easily convertible. In 9mm it doesn't even have the left side ejector. In 223 you have to swap bolts, much like on the Tavor. They are kind of fun to suppress, because the best way to do it is you just have a suppressed barrel assembly. You just switch them out. That's the way to do it. I guess some might argue they don't have as many rails or rail space as some newer guns, but it's hard to argue against the AUG. It really is, which is why a lot of militaries are still using them today. What do you think, though? So we went from the AUG A1 to the AUG A3 looking at the advancements. Well, now we're going to backtrack a bit. We looked at the FS2000 representing the F2000, but a lot of the technology used to create the 5.56 version there was originally developed just a short time before for the P90, and of course my PS90 here. And this was designed not as a submachine gun, not as a rifle, but as a personal defense weapon, emergency weapon, close combat weapon. And FN started this project in the mid-80s, and it was a clean sheet project. And that's usually where Bullpups turn out the best. When you try to retrofit something, say an AR into a Bullpup, or really an AK into a Bullpup, results not great. But clean sheet, and this also had a very specific objective in mind. Because before, PDWs in the 70s, at least in the West, you had things like the MP5K, represented here by the Zenith Z5K, hence no foregrip. They had relatively limited magazines usually, especially in their most compact form. A lot of them didn't have shoulder stocks originally, and they typically just had barrels in the 4 to 6 inch range, iron sights, you know, what have you. Well, FN wanted, and of course they fired 9mm. Number 19, not a bad little round, but the problem was military ammo had to be FMJ. So out of the relatively short barrel, relatively low magazine capacity, relatively high rate of fire, there were issues. They weren't perfect. And so when they designed the P90, they really tried to fix that. For one, they had an all-new cartridge. We know it today is 5.7 by 28. It's actually the second iteration. The first one was around from about 1990 to 93. Then they changed it a little bit to improve things. So the cartridge was designed to penetrate body armor from the get-go, the military cartridge. Civilian, not so much. And we have this magazine, which not only has a much greater capacity than previous PDWs, but also doesn't hang down, doesn't hang out. It's flush in the gun. And believe it or not, it's not that difficult to change out once you get the hang of it, especially inserting a new mag. Taking the old one out can get a little bit, it's still, yeah. But again, with this capacity, realistically, if you're in a firefight where you need a PDW, you probably don't need more than one mag. It was also designed to be completely ambidextrous, and one of the criticisms it gets is the relatively small flush charging handle, but that's part of it. If you had a handle that stuck out, like say on an MP5 even, which isn't too bad, that could get caught on gear or in a holster or in webbing. So they didn't want that here. They tried to smooth out all the lines, including why they didn't have a true pistol grip. And I actually find the gripping situation on this quite comfortable. Now, of course, the semi-automatic version has an extended barrel. The military version, well, you know, the barrel ends about right here. So truth is, it is not K ends here, much longer, ending about here, than a K, and you have a barrel nearly a foot long, including a shoulder stock. Even if you are a little scrunched up, well, it's still better than the previous guns, or trying to fold the stock. Again, the whole purpose of this is something that can be immediately deployed like a pistol, but to have much better capabilities. And it even came with an optic. Now, the standard one, the ring sight it originally had, was not a magnified optic, but it was kind of an early quasi-holographic style. They're quite cool. And the other side mirrors the first. These are built very well, FN quality, high quality hammer forged, chrome lined barrel, very good rate of fire for what they are. I really respect this design, at least the military P90. And this is one of the few guns I shot a full auto of. I'm not a big full auto person. You don't see them on the channel here, and I've only owned a couple in my life personally, but I did get a hands on a full auto P90 back in 2003, I believe it was. And at that time they said, hey, there's going to be a semi-automatic version coming out. And that hit the market in late 2005, and I had actually pre-ordered one and got it in 2006. Of course, the PS90 has the longer barrel. semi-automatic only, but in other ways, it's all here. Magazine controls, same quality, and originally, yes, the same sight. Of course, later ones replaced this with a pick rail. There you go. But also the ammunition. While it's not illegal to have the military 198 ammo or previous ammo, they want to sell you like the 197. There's a few different civilian loadings that are not supposed to be armor piercing. That's an FN thing, and it also gets into legalities for importation, pistols, and what have you. So I get it. In semi-automatic form, if you're shooting the semi-automatic recommended civilian ammo, you kind of think it's just basically a 22 Magnum. I understand that. I also understand that a lot of people do feel scrunched up on it. But I don't care. I love the fact that this is innovative and high quality military spec, and that it really is a one of a kind, with really the closest thing being the HK MP7, which we don't have semi-automatic versions of in America. And I honestly do think the 5.7 cartridge is superior all around than HK's 4.6. Now, is the 4.6 maybe better in a couple of areas? Yes. But the 5.7 is a more rounded cartridge. Essentially, it's a cut down 223 with the fancy bullet tip and everything. This gun, like I said, I picked my first one up, which was one of the green ones with first generation optic in 2006, and I had sold it, one of the guns I sold when I got married, and also started the business. I picked up another one again from CDNN right around the time they had those FS2000 standards with the optic. It was the second generation so-called USGI or Secret Service optic, which this one has here, which is this next generation ringside. It is superior. It's an alloy frame versus the original plastic housing. Also, it has the black reticle with the tritium, and of course it has the fiber optic. Yeah, they changed it up. And then the third generation, they went into the pick rail. And I sold that second one too during one of the panics, probably the 2013 or something. And the problem was the ammo. I enjoyed the gun, I enjoyed shooting it, but I just never could get enough ammo. And I thought I'd be okay with it. But much like with the FS2000 during the 2020-2021 time period, I had an opportunity to trade back for one of these, and I really did miss the gun. Unlike the FS2000, which I wasn't planning on getting another one of until it came my way, I had already been kind of low-key looking for a PS90. In fact, I'd ordered a PS90 with the Picatinny rail, what they called the standard version, and I was going to keep it and shoot it and be happy with it, because you can put a ring set on if you find one. But then this came along, and yeah, that was it. This is just like the previous one I'd sold. I missed it. And luckily today, 5.7 ammo is about as gettable and about as affordable as you can find. In fact, I did that thing with the Fiocchi, which was really only about 40-50 cents a round if you bought in bulk. And this isn't going to be your everyday shooter, and this is only going to have chambered for it. So I bought maybe 1,000 rounds. That's going to last me a while. And hey, that weapons pack for the 7 scale figures came with a little P90 cracked barrel, but this is the rail version. And it even came with what looks to be an MP5K or MP5K PDW sand stock, because it does have the barrel sticking out further. Even has the correct, dropping handle, charging handle on the side. There. I thought it was neat. If you kind of like fun stuff like this, I have my second channel, as I mentioned. Sometimes I talk about models, sometimes I do black boxes. It really is just a whatever the heck I feel like channel. And this week I felt like doing some customization with some Marines. So check it out. I even have some recent World War II figure pickups I've been reviewing in a historical basis. But yeah, that was just too cool. I wanted to sidetrack for a second and show you. Mechanically, this is a pretty straightforward gun, and it's often credited as being a direct, straight blowback, but the truth is, it isn't. It does have a slight recoil system with the reciprocating barrel. The barrel actually recoils just a bit with the bolt before they separate and eject another round. And I never will forget when I was shooting my first gun, I had my pants tucked in and a cartridge went right down my jeans. So that was fun. I was making a interesting new dance that day. Also fun, the black ones were the limited editions originally, with the green being more the standard release, so people wanted the black. But these days I see people wanting the green. Same goes for the FS2000. Me, I'm blind, I don't care. I truly believe the P90 serves a purpose in NATO that very few other guns, again the MP7, but not very few other can. And of course, it also serves the very important purpose of killing Goa'ulds. So yeah, as far as the semi-auto, being 100% objective, I can understand why it has limited to no practical purpose, but this is a subjective gun that I personally just really enjoy. I think it's a neat part of very late Cold War history. These did serve in limited numbers in the first Desert Storm War, and since then several nations and police departments, and even of course the U.S. Secret Service, have used them. It's an iconic weapon, and I just think it is worth picking up. And for a while you could get these for pretty great money. In fact, CDN was running a sale 10 years ago. They were like $900 dealer cost. It was a very brief sale, but yeah, pretty neat. But I understand why some wouldn't like it. It's not everyone's cup of tea, but if you already are a PCC fan, a submachine gun fan, a military historian, or just an FN Herstal fan, this has got a lot to offer. And it's a great companion to the FS2000 because they do share a lot in common. But the P90 has been much more commercially successful, and it's actually still in production today, again with a Picatinny rail instead of a ring sight. So it's a gun that I don't think I'm going to sell again. I think this is a long-term keeper. Famous last words, I know. Keeping on with the theme, we looked at the Tavor TAR 21/SAR, and now we come to the Tavor X95, or rather X95-2 or X95L. The second generation, and really the accidental gun that the IDF went for. Yeah, instead of really putting the TAR 21 18 or even 15 inch into full service, they acquired several, but in 2009 they decided, you know what, instead of getting either the CTAR or the TAR, let's get the MTAR, the micro Tavor. Originally, this was just designed as kind of a submachine gun sized alternative with a 13-inch barrel and shortened forearm. Often it was the round forearm meant for a suppressor, and it was just a small version of the full size. But as it turns out, it was more of what the IDF was looking for and needed, which actually makes sense if we look up here. This is an LM5/R5, but it represents the Galil SAR, which was actually probably the most successful version of the Galil in IDF service. At least it served the longest. The SAR was the 13-inch barrel version with shortened gas system and, the solid handguard, originally wood, soon polymer. And these were carried by tank crews and vehicle crews into the 21st century as a backup gun. But, of course, they were quite heavy and quite long, even though they had the same barrel length as the original micro Tavor and later X95. So yeah, and of course this saved weight. Depending on the configuration, the handguard with accessories, the lightest versions were about 6.5 pounds, the heaviest were about 7.25, so not a lot lighter than the standard TAR 21, but a little bit, but still considerably lighter than the SAR. Even it, with its shorter system, was about 8.5 pounds, so you're still saving quite a bit. And of course lengthwise, this was right at 23 inches with the shorter barrel and that could go out depending on the variations here, which of course the one we have has a 16.5-inch barrel, and a lot of people did SBR theirs, but actually the barrel doesn't bug me on this one. For you see, in military service there was actually a 16.5-inch barrel version known as the X95L, and it was used as kind of an ad hoc DMR, complete with an optic and sometimes a bipod or a grip pod. Also in 2014, the X95-2 came out, which had an updated, nicer trigger, and once they realized that the X95 was going to be standard issue, they went to a version with a 15-inch barrel, so like the CTAR. So yeah, this one's 16.5, but it was close in length to this, and that was to kind of give it the little bit better range. They also said it was better for turning corners inside buildings, and there are some 419 millimeter, so 16.5 inch versions in IDS service as well. So this is the platform they've been using for the last 10 years. There was a rumor a year or two back that they were going away from this, but that seems to have been kind of fake news. And this is the current version, and I like the changes. We have a much more AR style mag release here. It does throw some people off because they want to punch it, just like a AR thing, but the thing is, it's actually a flapper, so you don't punch it, you actually kind of rock your finger into it versus punching it straight in. So once you get the hang of the control, it works fine. As I mentioned, the trigger is vastly improved. Safety is the same, reversible. We have a modular pistol grip / trigger guard, and we even have replaceable grip panels, and I like that factor. Very easy to swap them out. You don't have to disassemble. There's just a screw on the bottom. We've got the railed handguard. Even though the round one was original for the micro, this railed style, the more squared off style, is in service as well. I have just a basic foregrip on it, nothing fancy. We still have a top rail with iron sights. I've got a Meprolite RDS optic on, kind of a knockoff of EOTech, but it works. And it has a very flat plastic butt plate. Now, when you get these, they had a really thick rubber butt plate, and that was to give them a minimum overall length. Everyone knows about the 16-inch barrel rule, but it's sometimes less known that there's an overall length of 26 inches required. I know you know that, but some other people may not. And with the standard butt plate and removable flash hider, you were at 25 inches. So what I did is I pinned on the flash hider, and then I could put on the correct standard butt plate, which I like a lot more. Same with the grip. Put the IDF grip on, and I didn't SBR it, but instead I did put on the SBR forearm and shorter top rail. And guys, if you've never handled one of these has the rails reduced by about 2 inches, it really does improve the handling and balance significantly. To my mind, this is a fun, handy gun. I like where the new charging handle's at. Of course, you can swap it to side. There's the 9mm conversion kit. Kind of like with the P90, you're a little more scrunched up on this. This is a little bit shorter back here, and of course with this forearm especially, less space, but so it is a little more scrunched up like the PS90, P90, but I think once you get used to it, the benefits outweigh. Now, the military started using these in 2009, as I said, late year. The semi-automatic X95, as it's just simply known, appeared here in 2016. Now what's funny is, before it came out, everyone was just kind of poo-pooing the original SAR, saying, oh, the X95 is going to be superior, we don't want to get that. People were selling their SARs. But once these appeared, and again, once the hype wore down, some people decided they actually preferred the original. I think a lot of it was looks. I think a lot of it, too, was just you had a lot more real estate out front. And there was some claims about accuracy. People were upset that they were getting crazy off accuracy. Some were. But the truth is, if you're getting 2, even 2.5 MOA out of a gun designed to be close quarters like this, that's very much within military accuracy, military specs. Don't believe me? Look at the requirements for an M1 Garand from World War II or an M4 Carbine from the day. Militaries don't need MOA or sub-MOA. If you can do minute of target, you're fine. So I think there were some truly defective X95s early on. A lot of it had to do with barrel harmonics or something up front. But I think a lot of it too was just unrealistic expectations, which is kind of a problem that I think plagues a lot of bullpups. When you put your trigger in the front and your magazine's action behind it, you're going to have compromises. Personally, like I said, I find the trigger in the X95 good. It's actually a really nice trigger to me. But then again, I'm used to military triggers. I don't have matched triggers in my guns. So it's really not any worse and even better than some of my others. I will also admit I had a lot of fun customizing this, from simply swapping butt plates to swapping the rail and the forearm, taking the barrel out, even swapping the handguard, the pistol grip. It was fun kind of making it my own. Oh, and those magazines, we talked about how IWI tried making their own polymer mags. They had issues, so with newer guns they've just used Magpul PMags, which is the correct answer. But no, I think it really is a good, solid bullpup. Is it better than the AUG A3? That's a matter of debate, and it could go either way. But overall, I like the look of the TAR-21, the SAR, a lot. But I gotta be honest, I think the benefits of the X95 outweigh its predecessor. So I definitely find grabbing this one to go out and have fun shooting to be a much more common occurrence than with the original SAR myself. But they do represent two different generations, and both are in IDF service, even if the TAR-21 is kind of in reserve and training use today. And this is frontline, along with, yes, some M4s that they also have. You can have more than one gun in service. And it did let all the old remaining Galils get sold off. And our seventh bullpup, well, it definitely takes the cake for biggest quantum leap forward in firearms technology. You know, the AUG came from the STG-58, the Tavor came from the Galil, the M4, the AR-15, the CAR-15, and the FS-2000, F-2000, P-90 came out of the FAL, the CAL, the CAL, and the FNC lineage. Yeah, but this one, again, I've talked about quite a bit recently, so I'll probably be pretty brief. Known here as the Springfield Hellion, known in Europe as the HS VHS 2, was Croatia's major leap forward from the former Yugoslavian Zastava M70 series. Yeah, they went from this to this. And this was really their first rifle design, at least, you know, in production. They tried out a lot of things. Of course, there was the original VHS, and this is the second generation. But HS Product only started making guns in the mid-90s in the first place. And they started playing with making a rifle, and they tried out everything, different actions, conventional layout, bullpup layout. They even gave a chance to turning AKs into bullpups. And, well, as I've already mentioned, that didn't work out at all. They just don't bullpup well. AK trigger groups, trying to move them back, the ergonomics, or rather move them further and move all this back, you know, it we've had some semi-automatic jobs that Century Arms did. The sights get weird. They're just not a good fit. And even the Valmet M80 2, I don't particularly recommend. But they tried it. In the end, they were inspired by the G36, the FAMAS, some other guns. But really, this is a gun that's its own thing. And it surprises me just how much I've enjoyed it. And as we talked about in a recent video, I settled on the 20-inch version that recently came out. The original 16-inch we got a couple of years ago. The first time I heard about, hey, they're going to try to bring over a semi-automatic VHS was back in 2013, 2014. So these took a while to come. But I really am impressed. Are they perfect? Of course not. But it gives the X95 a run for its money, because before this, I would have said objectively, my X95 was my most ergonomic bullpup that I had. I mean, to begin with, obviously, this is the length of an AK, even maybe a little shorter, and you have a 20-inch barrel versus 16. It's already a good leap forward. Of course, it's modernized features, adjustable gas system, Picatinny rail, ambidextrous G3 36 style charging system. Some complain about the trigger on these. I honestly find them fine. Maybe not quite as nice as an X95, but very much superior to the original Tavor SAR. Unlike the military gun, you do have interchangeable pistol grips. That's fine by me. I do like that, unlike with the Tavor, you can swap ejection without having to put a new bolt in. It's actually very easy to do. You also have a modular magwell, which right now doesn't do us much good, but it's nice that it is there. These that we get take AR mags. Maybe one day we'll get a version that'll take the original VHS mags. To be fair, over there, the military guns can do both. And one feature I always thought was neat about this one in particular was the adjustable length shoulder stock. And what's nice is when you fully push it out, you can fire it in what I like to call big pistol mode. And I really enjoy how it fires. I find it to be a very gentle shooting gun. You don't have the quick change barrel like an AUG, or even an easily removed barrel like a Tavor, but it's still removable, but you need the right tools. The handguard is modular like you'd think on a HK design. Of course, you have M-lock slots, pretty standard. The safety is greatly improved on the newer Hellions. We've talked about that in the past. Highly recommend it. Nice little change, small thing that they made, but much appreciated. And of course, as I've already pointed out before, had to have the 20-inch, so you could always do this. Objectively, I don't need it, have a reason why, but I simply love putting bayonets on bullpups, and I don't need a reason why. It's just cool. It just looks neat. That's all. Then it's there. And again, I've done a whole video just talking about the bayonet in and of itself. And it's cool that Springfield is importing these and offering these. And I like to put this kind of HK mag in there to give it the kind of Croatian military appearance. Now, it really has impressed me. And even has good iron sights for, simple backup styling. And the rail is entirely metal. And it really is about the most modern European military bullpup. These started to come into service around 2014, 2015, replacing the relatively briefly used VHS 1. There's, of course, the D model here, and then the K model with a 16-inch barrel. And those are really the only two military models. For civilians, we also have an intermediate 18-inch as well. So for me, this has been a bit of a surprise hit, and it's nice to have Something else, I really like my modern European import guns. The Bren 2 comes to mind. I like the 805 Bren. And I've done videos on why grabbing these now when they're available is a good idea, because they could disappear like the Beretta ARX 100. That's kind of the nature of imports, and it's kind of nice to have the current offerings. Now, yes, this is done partially here in the US by Springfield for logistical and legal reasons, but the bones are there. The gun is quite nice. And really, you can't build the Bullpup from a parts kit, at least not most of the time, because the receiver is so integral to the design and the barrels are usually so terribly unique. But yeah, this is a gun that's been coming out a lot with this, and really been digging it. It's been very, very reliable. A lot of fun. And it's been very successful for HS products. Iraq has been a big customer. The Croatian army has purchased a good number. And it's even been considered by the French to replace the FAMAS, although they did not go with that. But I was happy to add it to my Bullpup collection. And we end with all Bullpups of mine all lined up. And I want to try to say kind of something or a couple of somethings good and bad about each one to try to be fair. Again, as I started off the video, objectively, it's pretty easy to say that AR-15 are similar or just all around superior, especially with current price points on ARs. Very, very hard to argue with. But again, what a boring world it would be. And military has adopted these for rather specific reasons. Again, a lot to do with working within buildings, tight streets, getting in and out of armored vehicles or aircraft or helicopters or what have you. And when people ask me on live streams about whale guns or guns I'd like to have, a lot of Bullpups come to mind. Well, two really. Of course, a FAMAS, but those are just ridiculously expensive in America, and there's only a few out there. And the one I really would like to have would be an L85. Not because I think it's a good gun, but because it's historic and important, and there's literally just a couple in the US, and I'm sure they don't come up for sale. Factory semi-auto L85s are virtually unheard of. Virtually. And another one, a little more attainable but never came around, was again the Lithgow F90 semi-auto, the A-Trax. I was really hoping for one of those. Again, not because I thought it was necessarily superior, especially to the current AUG A3 NATO, but I love Australian guns, and it's been a long time since we had any, but I guess that's, done. So anyway, what do you think? I really want to have some interaction in the comments. I'm doing this video just so we can hang out a little this weekend. Sorry it's a little late, like I said at the beginning. Had some birthday parties, some family stuff, working on construction at the cabin, and this weekend, even though the week was pretty, the weekend was cloudy with sprinklings of rain, so, hopefully we'll get a lot more range time together very soon. So, pros and cons, what I think, beginning with, well, where we have to begin, the original Bullpuppy. Positives. I mean, it was in Die Hard. It's a classic. These were really well built. There are variations. Later, Steyr AUGs had some quality of life improvements, like with the firing pin. The roller was added. But, generally speaking, overall, they were reliable. And even though they took proprietary mags, those are still gettable. From the 80s till today, the mags are interchangeable. But mostly, you want one because of the classic nature. If you can't find a pre-ban, I would actually highly recommend the STG 77 edition that came out a few years ago. I know it wasn't 100% perfect, but it was 90% there, and it was kind of sad that it didn't sell any better than it did. But nothing is perfect itself, including the original AUG. For one, you might say, well, it doesn't have an external bolt release. Frankly, that doesn't bug me. Never has. What is unfortunate, though, is the optic here is part of this cast extruded alloy piece. And so if your optic breaks or gets cloudy, since this is the registered firearm, there's not much you can do. That's why I think the AUG 2 was an important update. And I do think, even though it's not a deal breaker or killer, in the military they can just replace this whole unit, but for civilians it does limit you. Now luckily there are still basic crude iron sights on top, so you're not 100% SOL, but it's something. Another thing is, these are all used now, of course, and they're quite expensive. So realistically, you're not going to buy an AUG SA as an everyday shooter. You're going to buy it as a collectible with all that entails. So I wouldn't really recommend it for that, unless you just want one iconic Bullpup, more for collecting than shooting. Moving to the FN-PS90, I didn't really put these in any particular order. I think it is super cool how unique the magazine is, how well made and small it is. If you do SBR one, it's a very compact little weapon. The ring sight is interesting, but once you get the hang of it, it actually becomes very instinctual and intuitive. I've tried this out with a lot of friends. And also, there are backup iron sights on each side. And the current rail version is still reasonably priced for what it is. You can find them on sale. And I think it's a lot of fun. And as long as you're using decent ammo, factory ammo or like, they're very, very reliable. But ammo, they're not always reliable with some aftermarket ammo. You can't always get 5.7. As I mentioned earlier, one of the reasons I sold my first one was I was having a hard time 10, 15 years ago getting ammo. It is proprietary, everything. Luckily the mags are reasonably available, but they are specific. And in the past, a lot of people said, well, I'd buy one if it was chambered for 223 or 9mm. Neither one is going to happen because this gun was designed around this 5.7 cartridge. 9mm would not feed from this mag or anything like it, so to make it a 9mm gun you'd have to totally rework everything. As for 223, well, even though this isn't literally a direct straight blowback, practically speaking it is. So it couldn't handle 223. It was never meant to. No, if you're going to have one, it is what it is. Of course, if you wanted a 223 version, well, FN made that. The FS2000 is essentially a 223 version of the P90, PS90, with all that entails. Again, when this first came out, I thought it was super modern, super cool. But now it's retro. Now, this optic, I think Military Arms Channel, a few others have pointed out, it was okay 20 years ago. It's pretty meh today, for sure. And this whole totally sealed up design is neat in theory, but in practice, as we realized a couple of years ago with the gyro at the cabin where you're shooting it, you don't get a lot of feedback from this gun. It doesn't hold open when you're on your last round. You can't readily look to see if you've got a jam. And if it does jam, now luckily this one's been very reliable for me, but if it does jam, it can be a bitch to clear. So sealing it up, while it does help it in environments like a desert, also has a lot of downsides and detractions. So even though the trigger is not great on this one, that's really the least of its worries. Oh, and the magazines are intentionally not drop free because it has little rubber gaskets in here. So you could cut those out, but you still wouldn't be able to get mag pulls in, I bet. Either way, but you don't want to modify that because these are pretty uncommon in America, especially the optics version. So this sounds like it's a bunch of negative. And objectively, it's not great. But it was better than, say, like the Bushmaster M17. Maybe not as good as the AUG, but they were trying. So why have one? I don't want to be negative. And that really is, it is cool. There's a cool factor here. It's strangely iconic, and it strangely does feel good in the hands. It looks like it'd be heavy, and while yes, it is bulky because of its polymer construction, it's not bad. And it's a high quality FN barrel. It's very, very close to the military version. and it is an import. So the reason to have one, this is definitely the iconic just because, and because it's different and weird. This very well could be the FAMAS of the future, because the reason the FAMAS is so valuable today is how few came in. Century didn't stop importing them because of the 89 ban, not really, even though it was almost the same time. It's because the FAMAS didn't sell. Kind of same here, especially again with the standard version. So if you have one, you might hang on to it unless you just really don't want to, because I could see these maybe not being quite as crazy as the FAMAS, but not far off. And it does feel strangely good in the hands. It's one of those guns that I shouldn't like as much as I do, but I do, and that's good enough. Moving right along to the AUG A3, and this kind of goes for the current AUG A3 M1 too. I have this one as my shooter. As we talked about, the pre-bans now are getting there. Well, these, are a reasonable price. In fact, they really weren't much more than a lot of the clones we saw back then and even today. And I have this one so I can swap it. I sometimes have it in 223 with the long barrel, sometimes I have it with the 16-inch carbine, and like right now, it's in 9mm mode. Swapping back and forth is quick and easy. You can do it in the field. We showed you that in a video last year. And having a Picatinny rail is definitely a quality of life improvement. And having the external release isn't a bad thing. And it does have a few other things like a more modernized flash suppressor and the updated firing pin. And it is a high quality gun, and I love how it does comply with all import regulations, but it's still a Steyr product, and it's very tight. Mine's worn very well over the years. One of the most reliable Bullpups I've ever had. I've never had trouble even with steel case out of it, and if you want to run it suppressed, it's actually a good candidate for that. It's hard to say if you want a shooter Bullpup, don't get this gun. It would definitely be in my top contenders as a shooter. The only downsides, really, it may not have quite the collector value of the previous pre-ban AUG. Of course, you're not going to pay that price. And it is an older design. It is getting a little long in the tooth. This one here still takes the standard Steyr mags, but you can get the NATO gun, but that does cost more. And it's a little on the heavy side, and the trigger is not the best in the world, although frankly I think people that complain about AUG triggers, they're doing way too much dry firing, not enough range firing. Unfortunately, the same can't be said for the original Tavor TAR-21 SAR. This really does have quite a spangy trigger, and as I mentioned earlier, you can try putting in better feeling triggers, but I've discovered that especially with certain types of ammo, you do lose some reliability. The only jams I've ever had out of this were when I tried different lighter trigger packs. With the factory trigger, as crummy as it is, this too I found to be a very reliable Bullpup. And I like that this one mounts a bayonet. It's a cosmetic thing, but I like it. More practical, 18-inch barrel's nice for 223, 5.56. That's about as long as you can really have usefulness out of. 1 in 7 twist, but it also seems to work well with 55 grain. Pick rail, but you also do get high quality flip up sights even with night inserts. You do get a side rail. You can swap the charging handle around. Of course, you do have the funky mag release back here, and you do have the rather large bolt release, which could be accidentally hit. I know I've done it. And if you want to switch to shooting left side, much like with the AUG, you have to get a specialized bolt. Of course, it does take pretty much all standard AR mags, including PMags, for the first time, and it does have the connection to the IDF, and people were really excited about these. And for a while, when they were kind of ending the SAR line, you could pick one up, any of the versions, for a very reasonable sum. And I like the silhouette. I really do. But the negatives are pretty clear. You have less than ideal ergonomics and controls. The pistol grip is fixed. Although it does have a storage compartment inside, which is cool, but you can't change it out. You know, the Cutlass style trigger guard. The trigger, I really think, is the biggest attraction. The charging handle is okay, but it's not my favorite placement. Safety's fine. And since they're no longer doing these, spare parts could become more of an issue in the future. So, yeah. And I will say, this is a quality gun. It is. But, like, the plastic and everything doesn't quite feel as high quality as from Steyr. I'm not dinging IWI. I think for the price point, and these were a little cheaper than AUGs, they give a great product. But when you pick them both up, to my mind, the AUG just feels a little more solid and a little higher quality. That's not to say Tavor is going to break on you, but there's a lot of AUGs that have been running a very long time. The track record's there. The Tavor, well, they didn't go with this full-size version, so, you know, hey. Moving on to the X95, frankly, this was everything I could have hoped for. I'm not one of those that was disappointed by it. For one, I think stock factory, this has the best trigger out of all 7 on the table. I like the new mag catch. If you're having trouble hitting it correctly, the way I try, and I can't do much because of YouTube, but kind of coming in and hooking back, once you get used to it, it's extremely easy to use. You have drop-free mags. I like how they slimmed down the bolt release quite a bit here. You still have the top rail with the folding sights. I like the new charging handle location. It's very, very intuitive. You can also put it on the right if you want. And you can SBR it if you want. In fact, they sold the kit, and probably still do. And I like that you have these nice rail covers you can install if not needed as well. And it is considerably lighter and better balanced, especially if you configure it the way I did. But therein lies one of the issues. Straight out of the box, the standard X95 is a little off-putting. The longer forearm looks different, and having the longer metal top rail means it is heavier than it should be. Of course, if you do it like I do, you do have limited rail space, I'll give you that, but it seems like it should be enough, especially your top rail. The one big thing is the big chunky rubber butt plate these have to come with. I know it's a legal thing, but oh my goodness, they feel and shoot and look so much better with the standard flat checkered butt plate. It's much thicker than this one and just looks awkward with kind of a curve. So you really almost have to SBR these, or at least pin on the flash hider. So little mods had to be done. The accuracy thing too, although I admit there was a bit of an issue with some guns, like a lot of things, it was a bit overstated. And another thing, it's a bit of expectations. You don't buy a gun meant to have a 13 or 15 inch barrel and expect it to be a DMR or sniper rifle. If you want one of those, that's great. This is not the tool for you. This is meant to be compact, light, modular, and that's another thing I do like about it, is the modular pistol grip system. That is very slick. Being able to change the grip, the trigger guard, the panels, cool beans. But I think the biggest improvement with the X95 really is having a respectable trigger. Also, the original Tavor mags, not a big deal, but they were pretty mid to bad, and now just having Magpul mags, small thing, but a good quality of life improvement. This, along with the AUG A3, is definitely in the running for me for best practical shooter bullpup, range bullpup, practical bullpup. And then, of course, ending with the unfortunately named Hellion, the VHS2. This one surprised me. I was always curious about them, but it wasn't like I was waiting with bated breath for this to come out. I was much more interested in the AUG A3, the Tavor X95, all those, FS2000 even. But I was going to give it a try when I did, and I was really pleasantly surprised with the 16-inch gun. Very happy with it. But then when this 20 came out, the newer safety, and the just more militarized looking barrel, and yeah, you do get a little more range velocity too, for 16 versus 20. Some complain that, well, what's the point of a bullpup if you don't get it as small as possible? And I get that. But there's also a thing of saying, well, you can have a full rifle length barrel, roughly 18 to 20 inches, but in a package still smaller than an M4 carbine. And I think that's where this really excels. And as I pointed out, I think the adjustable buttstock is neat. I think it really makes it possible to shoot single-handed. That is one benefit of all Bullpups, is there's at least the possibility to use one hand to use these and then have your other hand free to open doors, operate a flashlight, jack off, whatever it is you're going to do, eat a Twinkie, and go. They're still not as comfortable. You're still better off doing two hands if at all possible, but at least that option's there more than, say, with an M4 carbine. And this gun has proven to be very reliable, soft shooting, and out of the ones on the table, I would say it has the second best factory trigger right after the X95. It's fine. The new safety is fine too. I like the modular handguard. I like the G36 style top rail with iron sights and handle. And quality construction feels very nicely done on this too. But of course, it's not all roses. Never could be. I think the mag release being back here, I don't have a problem with it, but it is less convenient than on the X95. A little bit more of a throwback. Also, not having an external bolt release, except for here, it's again a little bit more out of the way than some I like. And there's no real external hold open manual latch as such, if that makes sense. So that the controls could be better here. I fully admit that. The interchangeable pistol grip is a very practical thing, but just from a collecting point of view, I really do hope someone makes a VHS2 style grip. For now, the B&T works. I do like the modular form, but I wouldn't hang anything too heavy off of it, frankly. And of course, the barrel is not quick change like on the AUG. So that would be the three I'd pick as a modern shooter. But again, I have to point out, this one's probably the most lefty friendly out of the box and easily to swap back and forth. The adjustable stock is nice, so in a lot of ways, it's the one that can be adjusted on the fly the most. So you gotta give credit there. On the other hand, you do have quite a high bore axis for your optics. So, you know, I'm just trying to be fair. But I've noticed the AUG A3, the Tavor X95, and the Hellion have all been very reliable. So, the reason I own the original AUG, the EFS 2000, and honestly, yes, the original Tavor, has more to do with collecting of military history. Not that they're bad guns, but I wouldn't pick any of those to be a modern everyday shooter. So let's pull those off the table. When it comes to military, those are designs no longer in purchase and production, whereas the P90 still is definitely being used by military. But let's be honest, its full assets are in the military version, from the shorter barrel to the full ammunition with armor-piercing capabilities to, yes, the ability for select fire. In a semi-automatic form, I'm not going to say it's completely without worth and merit, but you really should SBR it. The only reason I haven't is I have not found that original barrel yet. As soon as I do, I'm not going to put a CMMG in mine. I'm sorry, I'm not replacing an FN barrel with a US one. This seems counterintuitive. But that's really where it would stand out. SBRing it would be pretty nice for size and length reasons. And you can get the military ammo. It's not illegal to own or shoot, but you're not supposed to purchase it, buy or sell it, whatever. And this is just such a specific little gun that it's certainly not going to be your everyday range gun because of the cost of ammo. So we'll take it off the table too. And these are the three we're left with. Now, you want me to pick my favorite? I don't think I can do it, guys. I wish I could. But I enjoy shooting these because they each feel different. I've had really perfect reliability out of all of them. The AUG is still a classic. And I do like the kind of straight pullback 1911 style trigger. And I find they break in quite well. And I love the quick change barrels, the foregrip, but you don't have much real estate out front. It doesn't have iron sights. So, you know, yeah. But on the other hand, it probably is physically the highest quality built gun. The X95 is a little lighter, a little trimmer. You get a lot of modularity with the forearm, the pistol grip, the top rail that comes off with screws. I really do like the new controls. It's the best candidate for SBRing. You do get good quality flip-up iron sights. Again, the best trigger, even if it is the kind of pivoting style. And I really do, it feels really good in my hands. I like swinging this one around. Maneuvering wise, this one's the best. With the foregrip on it and this grip, I can swing this around, maneuver it around. It feels probably the best in the hands, just working with it. But it's probably the least accurate of the three. Not to say it's unacceptable, but yeah, it's probably the least accurate of these three guns. We've tested mine in the past, and it rounded out to maybe 1.8 MOA with high quality ammo, out to about like 2.5 with kind of shit ammo, like, you know, Wolf, Tula, that kind of stuff. The Hellion, the VHS. This is the newest kit on the block, especially the 20-inch version, so I don't have the long history with it. I've been shooting AUGs for literally decades. The X95 for almost 10 years. This particular version, I've had a couple of months. The 16-inch, okay, I've had a couple of years, but it's made a really good first impression. And I love this is probably the most European styled one. And it has the longest barrel of our shooters here, which does mean it's a little bit heavier, but not more than you'd think. The forearm I like, but it is kind of plain. It's M-lock. Not having the right pistol grip bugs me a little bit, but getting the right safety is nice. Probably the most awkward part about this are the controls in the back. I still give the X95 probably the best control layout of these. And this one has some good I really like this one's kind of a mixed bag. I like the charging handle a lot. I like that it can be switched over to left-hand shooting very easily. I love the adjustable, I guess not so much buttocks, but, you know, butt pad. But then, yeah, the weirdness here, and a few other just, you know, oddities of angle. And the trigger is mid. I'd have to really sit and shoot it versus the AUG A3 to see which has the best trigger. Both are fine, but that's it. And I've also noticed some mags can fit a little tight in this gun. Nothing that doesn't keep you from using them, but some mags you have to slap in really good with it. On the other hand, it's probably my favorite one to charge, but then again, I'm a sucker for the G36 action, so I just love using those. So I can't really pick a favorite shooter. And this one just hasn't been in my hands for enough years for me to say yet. So if I was going to say which one's going to last the longest, I'd have to vote for the AUG, only because of experience. If you're going to say which one has the most AR style, therefore the most acceptable controls, the best ergonomics, the X95. Also best trigger. But there's something to be said for getting a 20-inch barrel. I really like the sighting system here. There's something about the Hellion that keeps me bringing it to the range time and time again, and that's a testimonial in and of itself. Could also just be it's the newest one I have factor too, so can't discount that. And price-wise, you know, they're all kind of roughly about the same. That's just kind of where import 223s run, the Bren 2 and other conventional guns besides the ARX when it was out. So, yeah, none of them are ever going to be as cheap as an AR. No, you don't buy a Bullpup for economic reasons. You don't. So, you buy it because you want something fun, different. Maybe you're a collector of a foreign military. I don't know. And they are eye-catching. They are fun. So I'm proud to say I am a Bullpup guy. That doesn't mean I can't be an AK guy, an FAL guy, an AR guy, a G3 guy. I can be lots of kinds of guys. There's 7 days in the week, so I can have 7 different styles of gun, one for each day. Bullpups are my Thursday gun. We'll go with that. How about that? But no, what do you think? And there are other Bullpups. You know, you've got the Desert Tech, you've got the various offerings from Kel-Tec, you've got the old Bushmaster I've mentioned. There are some AK conversions and AR conversions that are Bullpups. Just because I don't like them, maybe your mileage varies, that's fair. But I like to stick to the ones that are military offerings, and this represents most used in the world. That is, unless you know where I can buy an L85 or a FAMAS. If you do, hit me up. I'm just teasing. But yeah, I just wanted to give you something for the weekend, guys. Sorry, output still might be a little slow for the next little bit because I'm busy, but I'm here and all's well. And I'll keep doing videos to make sure you don't forget about me. I haven't forgot about you. And again, there'll be a new Patreon perk published at the end of February, so interested, check that out. But seriously, feel free to comment and discuss your Bullpuppy experiences below. Hope everyone's doing well as we get into Valentine's Day week coming up Wednesday here. Hope everyone has a good holiday there, and I guess a week from now is also President's Day, everyone's favorite holiday, right? But yeah. With that, if you could like, share, and subscribe too, and if you'd like to help support us, Patreon really could use your help right now. Much appreciated. This is Misha.